The sea has taken all the Chinese laborers.
MacWhirr asked the bosun.
I saw an enormous wave. It took them all together in one big group.
Are you sure about that, bosun?
Jukes asked. He didn't think the bosun was very clever. He never understood why Captain MacWhirr believed that he was good at his job.
I saw it happen with my own 2 eyes, sir,
said the bosun. He then told them everything that happened from the time that the typhoon struck. When the bosun and the rest of the crew saw that they were in a typhoon, they ran from the deck and looked for somewhere drier to escape from the worst of the storm. Many of them went to a dark room under the bridge. Here, the ship rolled as much as it did on deck, but there was less water. It was very dark, and the crew were in the middle of a typhoon for the first time. Most thought that it would be their last time too. Fear made them start shouting, and with every wave that hit the deck, their shouts became louder. One of them said that they needed a light. If the ship was going to sink, at least they could see around them before they died.
I don't like the idea of drowning in the dark,
he said.
Well, if you want a light so badly, why don't you get one yourself?
Answered the bosun. This made them shout even more, for not one of them wanted to go out into the storm. The bosun didn't want to go and look for a light either. Outside the room that they were in, anything could happen. And the nearest place to find lights was far away. But then he remembered that there were 6 lights in the hold, where all the Chinese laborers were. He decided to go to the hold and bring one back. Outside, the ship was rolling wildly from side to side. The wind, the powerful waves hitting the deck all around him, the moving ship, all seemed to be doing their best to kill him. With every step that he took, he was afraid that he would fall overboard into the angry China Sea below him. He fought his way to the hold, falling many times. The typhoon was breaking the ship into pieces, and he often had to avoid pieces of thin metal that the sea and the wind threw at him. The noise of the typhoon was terrible to hear. The wind was screaming at him. It was a noise halfway between fury and pain. But underneath the screaming wind and the noise of metal hitting metal, there was something strange and new that he could hear. A deep, thumping noise. Was it coming from the hold? It seemed that something very large and heavy was rolling from one side of the ship to the other. The bosun couldn't understand it. There was nothing large and heavy in the hold that could make that noise. But as he came closer to the hold, the thumping noise became louder and louder. At last, he arrived at the heavy metal door to the hold and pulled it slowly open. What he found inside was terrible to see. The Typhoon was throwing the Chinese labourers from one side of the hold to the other. There was nothing for them to hold on to, so they could not stop themselves. When each new wave hit the ship, they rolled into a big pile on one side. Then they all rolled back into a big pile on the other side. The hold was full of their shouts and screams. The boatswain also saw many little pieces of wood all around the hold, together with many round pieces of bright metal. Suddenly, he remembered the labourers' boxes. Now, they were all in pieces, and the money that was once inside them was falling all over the hold. It was like a great storm inside the ship, but a stormy sea of arms, legs, and terrified faces, not of wind and waves. And so it was that the sea took them. Forgetting the lights, which were why he went on his journey to the hold in the first place, the boatswain hurried out of the room and closed the heavy door behind him quickly. He had to tell the captain about this. Crossing the deck, which had seawater all over it, he thought a number of times that the ship was sinking. There were no ladders up to the bridge now, but he half rode the waves and half climbed up to the wheelhouse. Outside, he found the second mate lying by the door.
Where's the captain?
Asked the boatswain.
Overboard! Like the first mate! And like we'll all be soon!
Said the second mate, laughing strangely. On his hands and knees, the boatswain moved along the bridge away from the man, and it was then that he found Jukes and the captain. After MacWhirr heard the boatswain's words, he was silent for a while. He asked himself what was really happening down in the hold. Were the Chinese labourers on the ship fighting, or in the sea, drowning? After thinking about it for some time, he turned to Jukes.
You must go down to the hold with the boatswain. If those Chinese labourers are fighting over their money, you'll have to stop them. But be careful. If anything happens to me, the ship will be under your command. See what's happened down there, and then use the speaking tube in the engine room to tell me.
Danger that they were in. As the typhoon got worse, he stopped feeling the water and the wind on his face. He was cold and wet all over his body. His arms and legs began to feel numb, and his thoughts came slowly. In some ways, it was a good feeling. He didn't hope to survive, because hoping meant fighting for something. He couldn't fight anymore. But now, MacWhirr was waking him from this numb feeling and asking him to do something dangerous. At first, he felt angry. Why should he fight his way through the Typhoon down to the hold? Because of some stupid story of the bosun's? Didn't the captain understand that the bosun had no idea what he was talking about? But when he heard MacWhirr's words, he knew that he had to go to the hold. There was no way to avoid it. Getting there was very difficult, because now there was no ladder from the bridge to the deck below. The bosun held Jukes by the arms and helped him to climb down slowly onto the deck. Enormous waves were still hitting the ship, and twice they nearly went overboard. At last, they got to the hold. Just when Jukes started to open the heavy door, the bosun grabbed him by the arm.
Be careful, sir! The wooden boxes are in pieces, and the money's all over the place. If those Chinese men think that you've come to take their money, it can easily turn dangerous.
Jukes looked inside, afraid of what he would see. The hold had a lot of water in it. Just as the bosun said, the money was all over the place. The Chinese labourers were going from one side of the hold to the other with each wave. Some of them were trying to climb a ladder that went up to a hatch. The ones at the top were hitting the hatch with their hands as hard as they could, but they couldn't open it. The ship started rolling the other way, and all the men on the ladder fell off slowly, one by one. Each one screamed as he hit the deck below. Some fell on top of the others. Then a really enormous wave lifted the ship right up, and all the men started rolling nearer the door of the hold, where the bosun and Jukes were standing. A great wave of water, heads, legs and arms came their way. Jukes and the bosun quickly ran out of the hold and shut the door behind them. He looked at the bosun and saw the horror on his face. Was this how his face looked too? He had no idea what to do, or if there was anything that he could do. He just had to tell MacWhirr about it. At the same time, MacWhirr decided to go to the wheelhouse. He had to see that everything was all right in this part of the ship. If there was a problem with the rudder, then there was no hope of surviving the typhoon. Like Jukes and the bosun, he found it very difficult to move around the ship. The wind pulled at everything that he was wearing, and when he got to the wheelhouse, he found that his rain hat was gone from off his head. This made him angry. It was worse for him than losing the lifeboats. Inside the wheelhouse, he found the second mate sitting on the floor, his head in his hands.
What are you doing here?
Asked MacWhirr.
It was my turn below deck,
Cried the man.
so I came in here some time back. You can't stop me!
The captain looked up at the wheelhouse clock. It was 1:30 in the morning.
A new day,
He said to himself.
You'll never see the sun come up!
Cried the second mate. The captain said nothing back to him, but turned now to the helmsman. He was a sailor by the name of Hackett. He stood at the wheel, fighting to make sure that the ship stayed on course.
he's a good man to be working like that in weather like this for hour after hour.
Thought MacWhirr.
Is the rudder still all right?
Asked the captain.
Yes, sir!
Answered Hackett.
I want you to stay at the wheel. I can't send another man to take your place here. He won't know how to control the ship as well as you. Do you think you can go on without any rest?
Sir! I can steer her all day and all night if no one talks to me.
Answered the helmsman.
I see. Yes, of course. Very good. Hackett.
Said MacWhirr. The helmsman's answer surprised him. The captain went to the speaking tube that they used to talk with the engine room. He called into it.
Route?
He needed to see that the men in the engine room were making enough steam. This was another important part of trying to control the ship. He spoke loudly into the mouth of the speaking tube again.
Route? Are you there?
By putting his ear very close to the speaking tube, he could just hear Route's answer.
I hear you, sir. It's not too good down here, but we're doing what we can. One of the engineers is hurt, but we're still making steam. How is it up above deck?
This Typhoon is really pushing us about.
Answered MacWhirr, looking down at the second mate, who was still sitting on the floor.
Route? Just make sure that we have enough steam.
Sir, we can't give the ship too much power. We may send her down into the waves instead of up and over them.
I know, Route. But we need enough power to steer. If we don't have that, we'll lose control of the ship, and then we'll sink.
So the wheelhouse is still all right?
Asked the chief engineer.
For now, yes. Route, I need to speak to Jukes. Is he there? I want him to finish down in the hold and come up and help me. I'm alone here. The second mate has...
Gone overboard?
No! He's lost his head.
For some minutes, the captain's voice was silent, but Route could hear the noise of a fight coming down the speaking tube. At last, the captain came back.
The second mate ran at me. He isn't well. I had to knock him on the head. Did you hear?
Route went off to see to the engines, but as soon as Jukes arrived in the engine room, the chief engineer pushed him over to the speaking tubes to talk to MacWhirr.
These labourers, sir. And from what I saw, this is what happened. At first, the Typhoon made them afraid and quiet. Then, one of the boxes fell onto the floor of the hold and broke. When they saw the money on the floor, some tried to grab it. That started a fight. With the rolling of the ship, they went from one side of the hold to the other, and the others joined the fight. Now, the storm has broken all the boxes, and all of them are fighting over all of the money. I don't see how we can stop it now, sir. I think that some are dead, and it seems that many are hurt.
Jukes hoped that Captain MacWhirr wouldn't give him any more to do in the hold. Then, the captain's answer came down the speaking tube.
Get some men and go back to the hold. Pick up all the money and put it somewhere safe. Typhoon or no Typhoon, I don't want any fighting on the Nan Shan.
I have to pick up the labourers' money in the hold,
said Jukes to Rout on his way out of the engine room.
What?
Replied the chief engineer.
First the second mate goes and hits the captain. Now you're making the hold tidy? Haven't you officers got anything better to do?
Down in the engine room, in the deepest part of the ship, they couldn't see the enormous wall of dark seawater that was just going to hit the Nan Shan.